Good morning, everybody. It is Jeff Goldberg for the Sales Pro Network. It is Friday, June 16th. I am live with you here coming from Long Island, New York. It's a beautiful day. As you may know, I am a sales coach and trainer. I work with both individuals and organizations internationally to help them achieve measurable and sustainable sales increases. I founded the Sales Pro Network. I keep forgetting to check. It's either 2 or 3 years ago now, to elevate the profession of sales, to be a place for salespeople to come and hang out, network with each other, learn from each other, ask questions, get help and coaching from fellow members, as well, competitors of mine, other trainers and coaches, in order to help you do one thing and one thing only: help you make more money. If you've been with us for a while, you know that every Friday at 10 a.m. Eastern, I either do a live training or a live interview, and 99% of the times it is a live interview with somebody who can help add value to the profession of sales and to you. Today is an exception. Unfortunately, our guest did not confirm. Just a little behind the scenes. I book these months and months in advance. Right now, we're booked up almost through the end of December with guests almost every single week, except a couple of weeks in there for the holidays. I confirm with everybody. I give them a placeholder on their calendar when we first talk, and that should hold the date. And then the week of the interview, I send them all kinds of information and confirm with them. And unfortunately, our guest today just either didn't receive my emails or was too busy to respond, or whatever the deal is. So he's not going to be here today. So I thought that what we would do is some training. Since I am a sales trainer and you're salespeople, I'm going to give you some of the advice that I've been giving salespeople for years and years. I'm actually going to give you some of the actual training that I take people through. I've trained tens of thousands of salespeople at hundreds of companies all over the world. In actuality, I can't be too terribly upset because the timing is really good. I think I teased you guys months ago, probably, towards the end of the year or the beginning of this year, that I had developed an online training program for both selling and prospecting skills. And I told you I expected them to be ready to be offered to the public by the end of Q1. Well, it took a little longer than I expected, but they are really moments away from being launched. I expect that certainly no later than 30 days from now, these things will be available to you guys. And I do plan to offer special pricing for any members of the Sales Pro Network. So stay tuned for that. But today is really a preview of some of what you would find in that program. If you are watching us live, please say hello in the comments. During the actual training, which will start in just a moment, I won't be able to see your comments because I'll be looking at the PowerPoint that I'll be sharing with you, so you don't have to just stare at my ugly mug the whole time. But if you do have questions, please do. Well, if you are here live, please do say hello in the comments. If you're watching us live on Facebook and have not connected your account to StreamYard, I'm not going to know your name. It just says Facebook user, so please do put your name in there. If you do have questions during the show or during the training, please put them in there. I'll try to remember to stop a few minutes before 11 o'clock Eastern and see if you guys have any questions. And finally, if you're watching us on the replay, please put replay in the comments. So let's see. Good morning, Bruce Caseman. Always good to see you here. Good morning, Tony Volpe. Good to see you, my friend. And with that, if you'll give me a moment, I'm going to share my screen and we will get going. Here we go. All right, so hopefully you can see my deck. I believe you can. Oh, look at that. You can see more of me than the deck. All right, well, sorry, you got to look at me too. So my first bit of advice for you is, in any given situation, don't be this guy. Now, this is the typical thought for salespeople in general, which is that the lowest of the low is a used car salesperson. Now, I happen to know some used car salespeople who are incredibly good at what they do, very honorable, certainly somebody you would want to do business with. But my best advice is don't be like this guy. In fact, in any given situation, I'd like you to think about, what would the typical salesperson do, and then do the opposite. In fact, if you're a fan of the show Seinfeld, I think I've said this more than once. I used to be a big fan, and I liked all four of the characters, but my favorite character was George. Obviously, you're looking here at Kramer, but my favorite character was George, because in one episode, George, the perennial loser, figured out that if everything he does is wrong, all he has to do is figure out what he would do in any situation and then do the opposite, and he'll be right. And if you're a fan of the show like I am, you know that in that episode, he gets a beautiful new girlfriend at the diner. He leaves his parents' house and finally moves out on his own, and he gets a job working for the Yankees. So in any given situation when you're selling, I'd like you to think about, what would the typical salesperson do, and then do the opposite, or at least do something else. Now, in order to be good at selling, you have to understand what selling is, and it is not. And it's certainly not what most people will tell you it is. Selling is not about convincing or persuading or talking people into things. Is there an element of persuasion and influence in sales? Sure, there is, but it's really not all about that. Sales is simply a conversation or a series of conversations leading to help the other person choose to do business with you. And I chose those words very carefully. I want you to just be good at having a good chat. Because in reality, when you're selling, that's what you should be doing. Having a good conversation. And of course, a conversation means you speak and they speak. A pitch, a word that I hate, is you just telling them, here's how great I am. Here's how terrific my company is and my product or service is and why you should be doing business with me. Now, you can close business that way, but you're going to close a lot more business if you engage people in a conversation that hopefully ends up with them saying, sounds good, sign me up, I want some of that. In order to be good at sales, you have to understand why people buy. There's a psychology behind why people buy. And in my not very humble opinion when it comes to this, people buy because it makes sense. It makes sense to buy your product or your service. In fact, I believe we do everything we do because it makes sense to do those things. So you may have noticed, I don't know how much you guys pay attention to it, but I wear a black t-shirt every week. Well, that's part of my personal brand here. I don't want to wear a suit and tie anymore. COVID changed that for me. I hope to never have to wear a suit and tie again, unless maybe I'm going to a wedding or something and I have to put on a tux. Even then, I'd like an open collared shirt. But it doesn't make sense to me to wear a suit and tie anymore. Sorry, I had to check and make sure he's there. I'm going to have to spell this for you. WALK, my DOG. If I had actually said those words just now, he would have jumped up and thought we were going to do that, which I don't want him to do while I'm talking to you. But in the morning, in the midday, in the early evening, and then again late, I WALK the DOG. Why? Well, it makes sense to do that because I don't want him doing his business in his house. I had a little breakfast before I got on with you today. Why? It was hungry, and it makes sense to eat when you're hungry. So we do everything we do because it makes sense to do those things, including buy stuff. So what we have to do in our conversation with people when we're trying to sell to them is have a great conversation and figure out what makes sense to them about what you have to offer them. What your prospect is listening for is what we call the WIFM. That's at least what we used to call it almost 50 years ago when I started selling it. And that stands for what's in it for me. It's an acronym. Your prospect is listening for only one thing. How is what this person telling me going to help me? What do I get out of this? If you can't answer, or if your prospect doesn't understand the so what when you're speaking to them, you're screwed. They're not going to buy from you. Everything you say, you should be filtering it through as if you were listening to it and going, so what? Well, if they don't get the so what, why you're speaking to them and why you're explaining what you've got for them and how it's going to help them, then you're in real trouble. They're not going to buy from you. And you need to not only understand why people buy, but also why people buy from you in particular. And I still believe that even though I've been selling for 48 years, the two things that people really buy are relationship and value. Relationship meaning you've built rapport with them. They like you to at least a certain extent, and they certainly trust you. Why would somebody do business with you if they can't trust you? Well, I'm going to suggest they won't, unless you've got what they want and they can't get it anywhere else. So you've got to develop a relationship with people at the very beginning of the sales process. And we're going to talk, hopefully today we'll get to it, about how I suggest you do that. So they buy the relationship with you, the trust and the like that they have for you, and they buy value. People are looking for what's in it for me, and that's the value you bring to the table. Whether you're selling financial services like my friend Bruce Caserman, whether you're selling sales training or coaching like I do, or any other product or service, it's the value that you bring to the table and the value that your prospect is going to get from investing with you, from buying with you, from handing over their money to you and trusting they're going to get great value in return for that money. The other thing to understand is, and I was taught with this by a good friend of mine. At the time, he was a vice president of sales and brought me into his company to to do some training for them. His name is Mark Antonacci, truly one of the best salespeople and sales leaders I ever had the pleasure to work with. And typically when I do a live training in front of an audience, I will tell the VP of the sales or the sales managers, please sit in the back of the room, try not to interrupt unless I say something that completely does not apply to your people. Your people really need to be listening to me today, not you. And I like them to sit in the back of the room so that the team kind of forgets that they're there maybe and loosens up a bit. But at one point during a training session, Mark stood up and started walking to the front of the room, which for the trainer at the front of the room, me, is always a little nerve-wracking. And he said, Jeff, would you mind if I put something on the whiteboard? And I said, of course not, because he's the guy who's paying me, so what am I going to say? And he drew exactly what you see here, SW, SW, SWN. And he looked at me and said, do you know what that means? And I had to admit, I had no idea what he was talking about. And he said, some will, some won't, so what? Next. And I think that's a terrific thing to keep in mind when you're selling. You've got to consistently be prospecting. So there are always people at the top of the funnel who are having first meetings with you, because some people will do business with you, but some won't. So what? Move on to the next one. Where we get into trouble as salespeople is we don't have enough prospects in the pipeline. And I can tell you, as a sales coach who works with people on a daily basis to help them, the number one challenge I find in everybody I work with when I first start working with them, and this is on both training and on coaching, they're simply not speaking to enough people. And I don't care how good you are at selling. Look, I often jokingly say, well, not jokingly say, I'm so good at selling that people pay me substantial amounts of money to teach them how to sell better. Well, I don't close everybody. That means I've got to be talking to enough people, because some people are going to buy and some people are not going to buy. And my attitude, unless I don't have enough prospects in the pipeline, is going to be, so what? On to the next one. If you have not prospected effectively and consistently, and we can certainly do a training on prospecting at some future date when somebody else doesn't show up today on that day. But it's if you don't have enough people in your pipeline, then you're forced to deal with the few that you do. First of all, only some of them are going to buy, which means you're not going to close enough business. And you're in an incredibly poor negotiating position if you have to negotiate price, if you're depending on a few deals to come through. So people are going to buy from you because they have a relationship with you. They see the value, and you, as the salesperson, need to be prospecting consistently and effectively, so you're always talking to enough people to support your personal goals. Now, the other thing that you should be doing as a salesperson is figuring out, who do you really want to sell to? And that means you need to develop what I call an ideal client profile, an ICP. If you don't write out and clearly understand what your best clients look like, how are you going to know them when they show up? How are you going to know who to actually invest your time with when they appear? How will you know who to prospect to? How are you going to know who to reach out to in whatever way you're going to do it? Whether you're cold calling, using LinkedIn, networking, whatever methodology you're using to prospect, how are you going to know who to prospect to if you don't define who your best clients really are, your ideal client? And that's what we call an ideal client profile. You see, the challenge can often be, we often fall in love with people just like us, which may or may not be your best client or your ideal client. So we don't want to fall in love with people until we get to know them a little bit, kind of like getting married. Most people don't meet somebody and say, let's get married and figure out the rest. Although there certainly is a 50% divorce rate in America, which means we often do make a bad choice, but we want to make sure that we're not falling in love with the wrong people. And for that, we have to identify what our best clients look like. The questions you should be asking yourself in order to develop your ideal client profile is, who is currently your best client, or who are currently your best clients? What industry are they in? Now, some of us are industry agnostic. I can train in almost any industry. I don't train people who sell online. That's really more marketing than selling as far as I'm concerned. I don't train retail organizations like here in New York. I don't work with companies like Bloomingdale's or Macy's or any other retail store. But what industry does work best for you? For me, I've done a heck of a lot of training for people who sell advertising. That's a good client for me. Banking, that's a good client for me. Insurance. I mean, I've trained in a ton of industries, but the ones I've done the most business with means those are the industries that are most likely to have my ideal clients. How do they pay you? Do they pay you according to what you really want? The way I work, and this is just me, I'm not telling you what you should do, but I don't mess around in terms of how I get paid. I get paid up front for everything I do. And if you want to pay me after the work is done, you're not my ideal client. I'm not going to work with you. Same thing when it comes to my price. I don't negotiate. I teach other people to negotiate, and eventually we'll get to that. Not today in this training, but eventually we'll do more training and we'll get to that. But I don't negotiate. So that means you pay the price I ask for and you pay me in advance. If you don't, you're not my ideal client. How often do you work with them? Are you in the kind of business where you need to be working with them regularly? Maybe it's weekly, monthly, quarterly, maybe it's only annually. What's the average length of your engagement with them? Do you work with them for years and years, or is it a one-shot deal? Do you socialize with these people, which is a great thing to do? You really want to get tight with your prospects and clients. Socialize with them, take them to a sports event, meet them for a dinner or a lunch or a breakfast. Also, you need to know, what do you like about working with those people? Here's something that I have in my ideal client profile. If you're not going to be fun to work with, I don't want to work with you. I don't want any clients who are, pardon my French, a pain in the ass. I'm too old and cranky to deal with people who are a pain in the ass. Here's something else for me. You're not going to take my advice? I don't want to work with you. Why would you possibly invest money, your hard-earned money, in a sales coach if you're not going to take my advice? Doesn't make sense. I'm not looking to argue with you as your coach. I'm looking to give you best practices so that we can increase your sales and you can make more money. Don't want to listen to me? I don't want to work with you. How much access do you have to them? Can you get to the right people in an organization? Is there anything that you dislike about working with certain types of people? You should know that too. And really, what is it that makes them ideal? The best question you could ask is, if you could design the perfect client, your very best client, what characteristics would they have? And it should be written down for you so that you're very clear. Here's what I'm looking for. And when they show up, you know that's somebody you should really be going after. You need to have a clear definition, because that's the only way you're going to find true love. And I'm going to give you a very quick example here. I have a dear friend. His initials are JD. I've known him since high school, which is a very, very long time. And JD, I adore him. He's this very smart, incredibly accomplished guy. If I gave you his list of accomplishments, you'd go, holy crap, this guy's very impressive. And he is. But most of our lives, JD was a whiner. And the thing he used to whine about the most often years ago was, why can't I meet a girl, Jeff? Why can't I meet a girl and settle down and get married? Well, here's what happened. One Super Bowl Sunday, we were sitting in a bar in New York City, and he's whining to me about why can't he meet the right woman and why is it never working out and all that stuff. And I'd heard it a million times. And what I did is I called over the bartender. I took a cocktail napkin, and I asked the bartender for a pen. And then I looked at my friend JD and I said, JD, who is she? Who is this one woman that you're looking for, that you want to get married to? And we spent about the next 25 or 30 minutes with JD listing out the exact qualities, the exact attributes of what he was looking for in a woman. And there were physical attributes, there were money, how much money she was going to make, all kinds of things that that JD felt were his ideal woman that he would want to marry. Well, here's the interesting thing. I believe it was about 8 months later, I was in his wedding party, and he met Paula, who saved my life because I didn't have to listen to his whining very much anymore. And now Paula does. But he met her because he knew exactly what he was looking for. And when Paula showed up, he said, there's the one. I got it. She's the one for me. And thank goodness she's still with him today. And they're a happily married couple, and I love them both. So you got to clearly define what you're looking for if you want to find your Paula, your ideal client. Now, if you're going to be selling, you also need to understand that as sellers, we are communicators. And there are certain communication principles which you have to understand if you're going to be able to have effective conversations with your prospects to help them choose to become your customers. And the first communication principle is, people tend to respond based on how we speak to them. People tend to respond on how we speak to them. So let's say, I know Bruce is here today. Again, I can't see the comments, so I don't know if anybody else is chiming in or asking any questions or anything like that yet. But I know Bruce is here. So if I called and I was looking to speak to Bruce, because he's maybe the vice president of sales at a large company with a lot of salespeople, that's a good lead for me to sell sales training to. And I call up and somebody else answers. And when they answer, here's what they hear. Here's me on the phone. Who the hell am I speaking with? So Joe Blow or Susie Quattro or somebody answer. Well, if it's Susie Quattro, I would probably have a conversation about her music. But if it's Susie, anybody answers the phone, and I say, who the hell am I speaking with? Well, how are they going to respond? If they're normal human beings, they're going to respond with something like, well, who the hell are you? Because that would be an appropriate response to somebody who yells at you when you pick up the phone and uses foul language. Who the hell are you? Or hanging up on me. would be an appropriate response to somebody who's rude enough to call and yell at somebody. People tend to respond the way we speak to them. So if we call up and we're fairly polite and courteous and we have a good tone of voice, they're way more likely to respond positively. For example, if I called up and I said, "Hi, my name is Jeff Goldberg with Jeff Goldberg and Associates. I'm a sales coach and trainer, and I work with companies like yours to help you increase sales. I should probably know who I'm looking for, but in this case, I don't. Can you please help me out? Who's the right person to speak to who might be making a decision on sales training at your organization?" And in the example I gave you, hopefully they would say, "Oh, that's Bruce Kaserman. May I connect you?" Because I spoke politely and courteously. So people tend to respond based on how we speak with them. Not every time, but most of the time. Also, we create the flow of the conversation. Excuse me. There's a flow to a conversation. Again, if it's a monologue, if you're just pitching, there's no flow at all. It's just you giving your pitch. But in a real conversation, there's a back and a forth. It goes up and down and sometimes goes sideways, but it's people talking back and forth. So we are creating the flow of the conversation. And whoever is asking the questions is creating that flow and controlling the conversation. And that's communication principle number 2. Whoever is asking the questions is controlling the sales call and the conversation. And of course, as you can probably figure out, I think that needs to be you. Will there be times when your prospect is asking questions, which means they're controlling the conversation? Absolutely 100%. I love when people ask me questions when we're in a sales conversation. But you have to continually guide the prospect back to where you want the conversation to go. And you do that by asking the right questions. Questions are absolutely 100% the key to selling. Excuse me. You may have been told that selling is about your great presentation skills or your strong closing skills. It's not. I'm a professional presenter. I sometimes stand in front of hundreds of people at a time presenting. I know how to present with the best of them, and I know how to hard close. I used to do it many years ago when I sold Encyclopedia Britannica door to door for 8 years. I know how to push people into buying, but things have changed over the last almost 50 years, and people are not that way anymore. The consumer today, whether on the commercial side or the private side, is way more educated than they were 40 or 50 years ago because of one thing, and that's the internet. The internet created a much more level playing field for the buyer. So we have to, instead of pitching people and trying to force them into something, it's really asking great questions and having a good conversation with them, which again, hopefully ends up with them choosing to buy from you. The third communication principle is, and this is great news, by the way, you can almost always anticipate what the other person is going to say in a sales conversation. In fact, if you've been in sales for more than 2 weeks, all right, let's make it 2 months, you've probably heard every objection you're ever going to hear in your sales career at that particular company. In fact, in every company I've worked with, both as an employee and as an outside consultant and trainer and coach, there's typically no more than 3 or 4, maybe 5 objections that you get on a regular basis, but that's great news. The great news is if you've heard the objections already, you should be prepared to deal with them when you're having a sales conversation. I can't remember the last time I heard a new objection when I was trying to sell my services. I've heard them all before because people only have a few things that they're going to object to. So we can almost anticipate what the other person is going to say, and that's very good news for us when we're selling. And finally, people communicate through stories. This is an important thing for us salespeople to understand. As a human race, we communicate through stories. If you are married, you have a wife or a husband, you have kids, you have relatives, excuse me. Do any of them ever get to the bottom line, or is everything a story? Well, I can't hear what you're saying. Please put that in the comments. Is everything a story, and do people get to the bottom line or not? My take on this is very few people get to the bottom line. Everything is a story. In fact, there are Aboriginal tribes in Australia and there are tribes in Africa. It's 2023. They don't have any written language. It's all communicated through stories that are passed down from generation to generation. So what that means is if as a human race, we communicate through stories, when we're selling, we need to communicate through stories too. And there's a particular type of story, which I suggest you have to be able to tell, called a verbal truth story. And again, that's way later in this conversation. I don't think we're going to get to that one today, but we'll get there eventually, I promise. Everything is a story, and you've got to be good at telling your story. Now, what you're looking at here is the typical sales process. It's a 4-step process. It's what I taught at my first employer who employed me before I opened up my own sales training consultancy. It's what most salespeople use. And these four circles stand for open. O is for open. That means you have to open up a sales conversation with somebody. And typically that's where we establish rapport. Second one is I for gather information or interview people. We have to ask a lot of questions to find out the answers that we need to help have a conversation with people that ends up with them choosing to do business with us. P stands for presentation or proposal or plan. This is where you share information with your prospect about what you're really going to do for them and how that's going to help them. And C, of course, stands for close. Now, I actually don't like the C at the end, the word close at the end, because when you close a deal, what you've really done is you've opened up a new relationship with somebody. But we're going to stick with that word close at the end because that's what we salespeople talk about. So this is a 4-step process. And one of the things I'd like you to consider is, what's the objective of each step in this process? Well, the objective of each step in the process is simply to move the deal forward. You want to get from O to I to P, and P to C as quickly as you possibly can. Not being rude, not cutting corners, but you want to get from hello to closed or hello to I'm not doing business with you as quick as you can so that you don't waste time. I find quite often that salespeople waste a lot of time chasing prospects who aren't really prospects. And that's one of the worst things you can do, because time is one of the one things you can't get back. You can almost always get back your health, almost always when you're sick. You can always make more money, but the one thing you cannot get back is your time. So you want to move the sales process forward as quickly as you can, or you want to find out very, very early that you had nothing in common with them and no chance of selling them in the first place. So the goal is to move the process forward as quickly as you possibly can. Now, this is what the 4-step process looks like, and this is what the 4-step process looks like in relationship to time. The relationship of the size of these circles, or in one case, more like an oval, is how much time the typical salesperson invests into each of these steps when they're selling. So you can see they invest a little bit of time in the opening and establish rapport, but not very much. They invest less time in the information gathering stage. And I promise you, my friends, the information gathering stage is where your sale is either made or lost. That should be where you spend the most time in the process, but most salespeople spend the least amount of time there. And what they're typically doing is they're asking a few quick memorized questions, which most likely their boss told them on every sales call, you've got to ask these questions. I call that checking off the boxes. The salesperson asks the questions, doesn't really care about the answers, just so that they can go back. And when their boss says, did you ask those questions I told you? They can go, yeah, boss, I asked those questions. Did you close the deal? Well, that's another story. So information gathering should actually be the largest amount of time in this process, but in the typical sales process, it's the least amount. You can see where salespeople spend most of their time: in the presentation phase and the closing phase. And in the presentation phase, what these stars represent that just popped onto the screen, hopefully you can see these, is a feature or a benefit, a fact, a piece of information. Each of these stars is one bit of information that we give to the prospect to help them make a decision to do business with us. I can't tell if your screen can show it, but there's one star kind of at the north towards the top right in the P circle that is a little lighter than the rest. What that star represents is the thing or things that are most important to your prospect. See, when we get in and we tell people everything about everything, here's the history of the company, here's how long we've been in business, all the people we've helped, all the 1,000,001 things we do, that's known as throwing up on the customer's shoes, or showing up and throwing up, or it's also known as a product dump. And the reason we as salespeople do a product dump is because we didn't ask the right questions, so we don't know what the prospect is really interested in. And our belief is, if we tell them everything about everything, the prospect will figure out what makes sense to them. Because remember, prospects turn themselves into customers because it makes sense to do so. It makes sense for them to buy from you. So they turn themselves into customers. And we hope that if we tell them everything about everything, they'll figure out why they should do business with us. But here's the challenge there. The prospect knows why they'll do business with us, but because we didn't ask the right questions, we now don't know. They know, but we don't. And that's why that circle on the end there, the close, is so large. We have to be very strong closers. We got to be hard closers. We got to know a million ways to close the deal. I teach one way. I teach people to ask one simple closing question, which is very straightforward. And again, we're not going to get to that one today, but we'll get there eventually. But if you don't know why the prospect will buy, you've got to be a strong closer. Now, here's the thing about what I've just told you. I've given you a lot of information about why this process doesn't really work. Well, the truth is it does work. It just doesn't work as well as what I'm about to share with you. Here's how I know this works. This is what the typical salesperson does. The typical salesperson sells exactly this way, and typical salespeople do sell sometimes, but they get typical results. And I don't think that any of you are watching this or are members of the Sales Pro Network because you want typical results. You want to help a lot of people get involved with what you have to offer them so that they get your product or service, you get their money, you can take care of yourself and your family, your company prospers, everybody wins. So the typical sales process will get you part way, but not as well as what we call the conversational sales process. Now, you'll notice that in this process, some of the parts are exactly the same. In step number one, we're still going to open up with them and have an initial conversation to establish rapport. And in a few moments, I'm going to share with you how I suggest you do that. Step number two is still gathering information, but we're going to ask lots and lots of terrific questions that help explain to you what makes sense to the prospect about what you have to sell them. We're going to add in a third step, which I almost never see salespeople do, and it's a huge mistake if you don't. It's called the confirmation step. It's where you're able to confirm that what you think you heard when your prospect gave you answers is what you really heard. Because if you don't do that, then you're going to base your proposal or presentation or plan on bad information. So we always want to do the confirmation step. By the way, it's the quickest and easiest step in the sales process. Step number four, again, we're still going to present. At some point, we still have to show people, here's who we are, here's what we do, and here's how we can help you, and why you should be investing in our product or service. And there's four elements to any good presentation. Step number five is negotiate if needed. Again, as I mentioned earlier, I don't negotiate on my price, but I know that some of you do, and certainly we'll get to that. We'll do a little bit on negotiation. And of course, step number six is close. At some point, even though the goal of every sales process is to get to the end of the process and have them say, sounds good, sign me up, I want to do business with you, Jeff, or I want to do business with you, Bruce, or anybody else. That's the goal. That's not typically the way it works. People still need to be invited to do business with us, and we invite them by asking a closing question in order to secure the sale. So with all that said, the first thing we're going to do is establish rapport with people, whether we're on the phone, on Zoom, or in person. And I'm finding more and more we're getting back to a lot of face-to-face selling, which I think is a good thing. I certainly love the economy of scale and time there is in selling virtually, but to me, there's nothing that replaces a face-to-face meeting. In the hierarchy of selling, face-to-face meeting blows everything else away. Second best would be some type of a video conference call. Third best is telephone. After that, it's everything else. So the question becomes, if what we want to do is establish rapport with people, and we do want to do that, we want to get them to like us and trust us, or at least establish a baseline for that we can eventually build on. How do we do it? How do you get people that you've never met before, possibly never spoken with before, unless maybe you called them on the phone to set an appointment and had a brief conversation with them and they agreed to meet with you? How do you get people who don't know you to start to know you and like you and trust you? Well, we have to understand that unless they have no other choice, people are going to do business with people that they like and trust. So if you've got what somebody wants or needs and they cannot get it anywhere else, you could be the biggest bastard in the world. You can treat them horribly because what are they going to do? They got to get it from you if they're going to get it at all. But most of us are not in that situation. I offer sales training and coaching. There's a lot of other sales trainers and coaches in this world, and plenty of them are really good at what they do. I'm highly confident that I'm extremely good at what I do, but I know there are people who I'm sure that are better and lots who are worse. So people can get what I offer, sales training and coaching, lots and lots of places. They can't get exactly what I offer because that only comes from me, but they can certainly get sales training and coaching. So I still need to establish a relationship, establish rapport with people so that they begin to like and trust me. Otherwise, they're not going to do business with me. Remember, people are buying relationship, the way they feel about you, and the value that you bring to the table. So The way I establish rapport with the people I sell to is I want to get them talking about their favorite subject. And the good news here is everybody has the same favorite subject, and it is themselves. Everybody's favorite subject is me. Well, I wish it was me. Everybody's favorite subject is themselves. So what I do when I'm meeting a vice president of sales or a president or a CEO, when I'm selling sales training, those are the three people I speak with: president, CEO, vice president of sales. Anybody below that can't make a buying decision, can't sign a check, can't sign a contract. So when I'm selling sales training, I don't meet with those people. Sales coaching, that's a different story. I can speak to a sales manager who wants to invest in coaching for their salesperson. I can speak directly to salespeople who can make decisions for themselves. But when I'm selling sales training, I'm talking to a president, a CEO, or a vice president of sales, or above, vice president, executive vice president, senior vice president, something like that. So I want to get these people talking about their favorite subject, which is themselves. And I do that by not starting on a meeting by thanking people for their time. I believe this is a huge mistake. This is what the typical salesperson does, of course. They walk in or they get on a call and they start, thank you so much for your time today. I know how busy you are and I want to respect that. I'm going to get right to the point and share with you why Jeff Goldberg and Associates is the greatest sales training and coaching company in the world and why you should be using us. Here's the challenge when you thank people for your time, which, by the way, is how most of us were trained. Respect the almighty customer, bow down to them, put them on a pedestal. Well, I don't want to do that, because if I put you on a pedestal, you're up here and I'm down here. What I want to be is, well, I'd actually like the reverse to be true. I'd like you to look up to me. But at the very least, I want to be on an even keel with you. I want that balance and harmony in our relationship, because why would you respect me? Why would you trust me? Why would you even like me if I'm putting you up on a pedestal? You may like me if you're the type of person that likes their ego stroked, but you're certainly not going to trust me and you're not going to respect me. And why would you hand, I'll just use me as an example. Why would you hand me money to train you or your salespeople how to sell more effectively unless you trusted I actually knew what I was doing? The answer is you would not. So don't start out the conversation by thanking people for their time. What I will say is, let's assume I'm selling to somebody named Doug, a vice president of sales at a large organization. I'm going to say, hey, Doug, I'm just curious about something. Before we get started, how'd you get to be, and then I'm going to fill in the blank at the end of that sentence with whatever their title is. So if Doug is the senior vice president of sales and marketing, I'm going to start out by saying, hey, Doug, I'm just curious, before we get started, how'd you get to be the vice president of sales and marketing here at Dougco? And then I'm going to shut up. Now, I'm just curious is what I call a softener. Of course, you're going to shut up when you ask that question, because silence can be your best friend. I'm just curious is what I call a softener. And a softener is a word or a phrase that you put before a question, which softens the question and makes it more conversational. And that's what I'm looking to do. I want to have a great conversation with people. So I want to make it easy for them to talk to me. And I'm going to use softeners. So a softener is a word or a phrase that you put before a question, which softens the question and makes it more conversational. Here's some examples of softeners. I'm just curious, out of curiosity. By the way, incidentally, I may be wrong, but I mean, you could probably come up with 10 or 20 more for yourself. I tend to use out of curiosity and I'm just curious interchangeably in my conversations. And one of those is before almost every question. So when I say I'm just curious, I'm inserting a softener and making it more conversational. So I'm just curious, before we get started, how'd you get to be the senior vice president of sales and marketing here at Dougco? And I'm going to then shut up and let Doug talk to me and answer my question. How did he get to be who he is? I'm going to be making eye contact while Doug is speaking to me about his favorite subject himself. By the way, Doug's probably going to give me his resume, where he went to school, his first job, how he got promoted or recruited away, or how he worked hard and moved his way up, or whatever it is. And all that time, I'm making eye contact with Doug. I'm going to blink occasionally because I don't want to be a stalker, but I'm going to make eye contact with him, because when you make eye contact with people, people feel you're trustworthy. When you look away or look to the side, people feel that you're untrustworthy. I'm going to take notes during that conversation. If I'm on the phone, I'm going to say something like, oh, hold on a second, let me write that down. That was incredibly important. I don't want to forget this, because I want people to know that I'm taking notes, whether they can see it or not. I want them to know I'm taking notes, because when I do that, they feel, oh, that's pretty cool. Jeff thinks the words that I'm telling him are important. Now, remember, we're just having a conversation about how they got to be who they are. So I'm not writing down everything. I don't want to be a stalker. But if Doug tells me, I went to the University of Virginia, I'm going to write, went to UVA. I got my first job in sales at a printing company. Just a few notes so I can refer back later on and remember our conversation. I'm going to do my very best to make my prospect feel special by listening to them actively, by taking notes and showing them that their words are important to me. Because most people do not feel special most of the time. If I can make somebody feel special, what happens on an unconscious basis is they start liking me. And that's my whole goal here. Remember, all I'm trying to do right now is establish rapport, get you to start to like me and build some trust. So I want to make people feel special. I'm going to encourage them to keep talking as long as I possibly can. The average that I get when I'm dealing with a president, CEO, or VP of sales is about 7 minutes of them talking about their favorite subject, with me encouraging them to keep talking by nodding my head slightly, not this nod, but the slight psychological nod that says, I'm listening to every word you're saying, please continue. And I'm going to make sounds and noises to encourage Doug to continue telling me about his favorite subject himself. Really? No kidding. Wow. How'd that work out? What made you do that? I want Doug to talk as long as he possibly can about his favorite subject himself, because what happens on an unconscious basis is he starts thinking, this guy Goldberg's all right. He's definitely not the typical salesperson. He didn't come in and thank me for my time, and he didn't start pitching me. He's actually interested in me. I think I like this guy. Now, again, that's not at the top level consciousness, but on an unconscious or a subconscious level, that's exactly what's happening, and that's exactly what we want Doug to be doing, thinking this guy or gal is all right. I'm going to talk way less and I'm going to listen more. And you guys right now are listening to a guy who loves the sound of his own voice. I love talking. I love when people are listening to me. Some of you know that I'm also a stand-up comedian. I don't get enough of people listening to me during the week. On evenings and weekends, I'm also out in comedy clubs to have more people listening to me. But when I'm selling, I talk less and I listen more. If you are dealing in more of a consumer sale, or maybe you're on the telephone taking inbound calls, you can still use things like, how are you doing today? How was your weekend? Any big plans? Or if you happen to know, I see you live in Salt Lake City. How's the weather there? These are what I call kind of cheaper ways to establish rapport. You fish, I fish. You like bike riding, I like bike riding. You like Pink Floyd, I like Pink Floyd. Well, those are great things to have in common if you can actually discover those things. But my point here is, if you have nothing else, use something like this. Nice weather we're having, or whatever. How about those Mets? Because if you just start the conversation with, let's get right to the point so I can tell you how I can help you, you're missing the essential step of building a relationship. And if you do that, I think you're going to be lost most of the time. You're certainly going to close more business if you take the time to establish rapport up front. And remember, Dale Carnegie, who wrote the book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, said, it's better to be interested than interesting. It's better to be interested in the other person than try to be interesting to them. You do not have to dazzle people with your brilliance. All you have to do is be a human. And Mary Kay Ash, the founder of Mary Kay Cosmetics, an incredibly successful person, said, pretend that every single person you meet is wearing a sign around their neck that says, make me feel important, make me feel special. Not only will you succeed in sales, you will succeed in life. And I live by that one too. Now that we've established rapport with somebody, the next thing we have to do is start asking questions, because this is the key to selling. This is where your sale gets made or lost. So you have to gain the right to ask questions, and you do that by developing your brief commercial, and I'm going to show you how. Information gathering, asking questions and learning how you can help somebody, learning what makes sense to them and how you can help them, is the most important part of the sales process. So we want to make sure that we're putting emphasis on this. What I want to do is I want to gain the right to ask questions. Now, here's the thing. When somebody agrees to meet with you, to have a sales conversation about possibly being interested in what you have to offer them, it's kind of implied that you're going to be asking some questions, but I want to make sure that I have the absolute right to do that. And here's something that I believe. If you ask me a question and I answer your question, I now have the right to ask you questions too, because turnaround is fair play. You ask me a question and I answer it, I now have the right to ask you questions too, which is all I want to do, by the way. I just want to ask you a bunch of questions. I don't want to interrogate, well, I do want to interrogate you, but when you interrogate people, they get shut down. So what I'm going to do is, at this point, Doug, the VP of sales in this example, I'm going to get Doug to ask me a question so that I can then answer it and then have the right to ask questions myself. And by the way, Doug's not actually going to ask me the question out loud, but he's still going to ask me a question. So I'm going to say, after Doug gets telling me all about himself, I'm going to say, hey, Doug, would it help if I tell you a little bit about my company? Or would it help if I go first? Or would it help if I tell you about Jeff Goldberg and Associates? Anything like that. Now, what's Doug going to say? Doug's going to say yes, because he thinks he's about to get the pitch. He thinks he's about to learn the reason I'm speaking with him today and what I have to offer him. He's not going to get that yet. He's going to get that later on, but Doug thinks that he's going to get that. So of course he's going to say yes every single time. So we want to gain the right to ask questions, because in essence, when I say, would it help if I go first, or would it help if I tell you a little bit about my company? And Doug says yes. In essence, he's asked me about my company. And when I now answer Doug with my brief commercial, I've answered his unasked question, gaining the right to ask questions myself. The prospect does think, Doug thinks I'm about to pitch him. I'm absolutely not. I'm going to answer his unasked question so that I have the right to ask questions too. I do want to interrogate people, but we don't want to be beating people up or making them feel like they've been beat up, because that's going to shut them down. Excuse me. That's when they cross their arms and say, I'm not interested in anything you've got to say. So in order to develop your brief commercial, it's also known as an elevator pitch or a 30-second commercial, I don't care what you call it, there are a couple of things that you need to be able to do. By the way, your elevator pitch is not your presentation. This is not saying, here's exactly what I'm going to do for you. You're just giving them a general overview of, here's who I am, here's who my company is, and here's how I help people or companies like yours. And in order to do that, we have to be able to answer these questions. What is it that we sell? What makes us different? And while we're not typically the least expensive option, people choose to do business with us because, and you have to fill in the blank at the end of that sentence, unless you do happen to be the least expensive option, which is certainly not true in my case, and usually not true for most people. But if you are, then in that case, you would say, we're the least expensive option, and people choose us because of our price, most likely. But it's not usually that way. So I want to just give you a quick example. When you're trying to figure out and answer the question, what do we sell? It's typically not what you think it is. So I mentioned earlier that one of the niches I've done the most training in is people who sell advertising, newspaper advertising, magazine advertising, radio, TV, cable, you name it. I've trained people who sell that type of advertising. When I ask a room full of advertising sales representatives, what do you sell? What do you guys think they say? Well, if you're anything like most people that I train, you just said advertising, Jeff. When you ask advertising people what they sell, they say it's advertising, except it isn't advertising. Advertising salespeople do not sell advertising. Advertising salespeople sell making the doorbell ring, bringing prospects into your store, into your business to do business with you, making the cash register ring. That's what advertising salespeople sell. So you have to understand, what are you really selling? It may not really be the product or service. It's what the product or service does for them. It's the difference between a feature and a benefit. You see, we salespeople tend to focus on the features of what we have to offer, but people buy benefits. So when we're telling them what we sell, we have to tell them what it does, not the thing itself. It's what it does for you. My hunch, and I'm pretty positive on this one, is the companies that I do business with, other from a human resources standpoint and a very ugly picture standpoint, I'll bet that the companies that bring me in to train their salespeople to sell more effectively could not care less if I stood on my head in front of the class all day long, naked, I know that's an ugly picture for both of us, whistling Dixie, as long as at the end of the day, their salespeople get more appointments with decision makers, have a shorter sales cycle, and close more business more profitably, because those are the benefits I bring to the table. When a company engages with me, or when a person wants me to coach them, they want more appointments with decision makers. They want to shorten their sales cycle so they can close people more quickly, and they want to close more business so they can make more money. Those are the benefits I bring to the table. The features are sales training and sales coaching. But I don't think anybody cares about that. What they care about is the result of those things. Did sales increase? Did they close more business? Did they make more money? So they couldn't care less if I stood on my head and whistled Dixie, as long as at the end of the day, those things are what happen. So we have to be able to figure out, what do we sell? What makes us different, not better? We never want to knock the competition. And while we're not typically the least expensive option, people choose us because you want to show the prospect why you're different, not better. You never, ever want to knock your competitor. That's there. Let the prospect figure out how to knock your competitor. You don't want to do that. And if your competitor is knocking you, they're really doing themselves a disservice. It almost always blows up in your face. Excuse me. Show them how you're different, and the prospect is going to figure out if it's better or not. Something else to consider, and I know this may upset some people, but most prospects are not looking for the cheapest price. Prospects think they're looking for the cheapest price, but they're not. By the way, most salespeople also think that prospects are looking for the cheapest price. I'm here to tell you they're not. So what you're looking at is the picture that I was able to find on the internet of an old Honda Accord. I like to say that you can pick up a 1975 Honda Accord for like $500. They run forever. They're great cars. They really are. I used to have a Honda Accord. They're terrific cars. They're not really sexy, but they're terrific cars. Very reliable, very comfortable. But you can pick one up very cheaply. But most of you, I'm guessing, are not driving around in 1975 Honda Accords. I'm not. There are people who have $95,000 Mercedes and even more expensive cars. And the question I always ask a room full of salespeople, I love doing this, by the way. I'll say, who here drives a really nice car? And there's always at least one who can't wait to raise their hand and brag about the kind of car they have. Oh, well, Jeff, I have a Mercedes 500 SL. Really? Great. Why'd you buy it? Why'd you spend $95,000 for a car instead of $300 or $500 for a used Honda? Well, the Mercedes owner, the person who bought a Mercedes, by the way, as far as I'm concerned, God bless them for being able to afford it and having the good taste to buy a nice car that looks good and handles well. They see $90,000 or $95,000 more value in owning a new Mercedes than an old Honda. And it's the value that people will buy. Is there a prospect who wants that $300 or $500 Honda? Absolutely, but not most people. Most people are looking for something more. They're looking for the value, and that's our job. How do we express the value that we bring to the table so that the prospect understands it clearly and realizes, I don't really care how much it is. I got to have it no matter what it is. I guarantee you, there are sales trainers that you can hire that are way less expensive than me. There are also some that are way more expensive. I mean, multiples way more expensive than me. I'm kind of right in the middle in my pricing for both coaching and training. I'm assuming there is a market for cheap sales training, but not a big one. See, I give a lot of thought to what my prospects are looking for. And I don't believe there's a single prospect I've ever met with that had in their mind, where can I find the cheapest sales training I can get? Well, why would they want to do that? That's not what my prospects are looking for. My prospects are looking for the very best sales training or coaching they can get at a price that they feel is reasonable, in other words, worth it, and that they can actually afford. You may think a $90,000 or $95,000 Mercedes is worth it, but maybe you can't afford it, which, by the way, means you need to hire me as your coach so that you can. But it's all based on the value. So we've got to show the person enough value so that hopefully they can afford to invest with you. And in developing your brief commercial, you want to make sure that the person understands clearly, here's who I am, here's who we are, here's what we do, but most importantly, here's how we help companies like yours. And what you're looking at right now is my actual brief commercial. So after I've asked Doug to tell me about his favorite subject, himself, and I've listened to him talk about himself for 4, 5, 6, 7 minutes, and then I say, Doug, would it help if I tell you a little bit about my company? And Doug says, yes. I'm going to say, well, Doug, Jeff Goldberg and Associates is a sales coaching and training firm. We help organizations just like yours achieve measurable and sustainable sales increases. I want to point something out to you guys now. Sales coaching, feature. Sales training, feature. Measurable increases, sustainable increases, benefit. We work with your sales reps and their managers to help them get more appointments with decision makers, shorten their sales cycle, and close more business more profitably. Now, Doug, everything we'll do with your company is based on my personal experience of almost 50 years in sales, sales management, sales coaching, and sales training. And when you combine that with my background in theater and stand-up comedy, you get somebody who's uniquely qualified to work with your team that's going to both engage and entertain them while they learn to sell more effectively. By the way, Doug, even though we're not the least expensive option, and we're not, people choose Jeff Goldberg and Associates because when we leave, their salespeople do get more appointments with decision makers. They do have a shorter sales cycle, and they just plain close more business more profitably. That's my brief commercial, and you need something similar to that in order to get past the point where we're up to, gain the right to ask questions, and then do the most important thing in the sales process, which is asking questions. So I think this is actually a pretty darn good place to stop because we're almost out of time. So I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to come back to StreamYard, which I haven't been able to look at, and let's see if there are any questions. All right, let's see. Somebody says, hi, Jeff. I'm not sure who that is. It says Beach Bud, can't spell. That's my dog, Beach Bud. Somebody says, I don't negotiate with terrorists. Okay, me either. I don't consider my prospects terrorists, but I get the point in the joke. My friend Larry Rice, the phone guy, says, we work the same way. Pay up front. Never have a collection problem. Larry, that's exactly why I do it. When I formed my company, I interviewed a lot of people, and I found that the thing that I heard most often from business owners was that business was good, but we just can't get paid. I never have that problem. I never have to worry about, am I getting paid? Because I got your money in my hot little pocket before I left my house. In fact, your check has to clear my bank before I get on a plane or in my car or anywhere to come train your company. It's just the way I work. By the way, that's not the way it is in my industry. In the sales training industry, typically companies get 50% up front and 50% when the program's done. Not if you want me. You're going to pay me up front. Somebody said, preach. Well, thank you. I'm doing my best to preach to you. Larry also says, hi, you all. Munish says, thumbs up. I'm glad you're liking this. Somebody, Facebook user, can't see who you are, says, I offer the most value. That's exactly what you're looking to do. Tons and tons of value, because that's what your prospect is looking for. And Dr. Rich Atkins, one of my favorite people, who's also a great musician, by the way, and an excellent trainer in speaking and communication skills. He's awesome. He says, I had a prospect recently who, when I was info gathering, was so crazily disorganized and all over the place that I really couldn't get good information from him. Wow. I finally gave up and organized his products and services that he wants training to sell for his team by getting it from his company website. Well, at least the website had the information. That's great. What do you do with completely disorganized people that can't communicate in any coherent way what they want or need? Well, that's a great question, Rich. I like that one. So I don't know that I've ever run into somebody who is completely incoherent about what they want and they need, but I put less emphasis on what they say they want and need and more emphasis on the questions I'm asking them and the answers I'm getting, which obviously in your case, if the answers weren't coherent, you're in a pretty tough situation because you're not going to understand what they want and need. I consider it my job to let them know what's best for them. Like a true consultant. It's my job to come and have a conversation with them, figure out what would be best for them, and then offer that. When you only sell on wants and needs, which is, by the way, what most sales trainers will teach you, look for the want, look for the need, or look for the pain. If you find the pain and fill it, you'll get a customer. If you find the want or the need and you fulfill that, you get a customer. The challenge there is, I think you're leaving business on the table. Because what if people think they don't want anything or don't need anything? What if they're happy with what they're doing? In many cases, that's exactly the case. So it's my job to find out what makes sense to them. What they're doing now is what makes sense to them. And when we continue this in another session, if anybody doesn't show up in the future for an interview, I'll be glad to expound on that a little bit more. I hope that helped at least a little bit, Rich. Somebody says, sometimes the prospect just wants to see what you have. They have pain, but not only won't disclose the amount of pain, nor provide me the information to provide a customized solution. Well, I would suggest whoever you are, my friend, and you could be somebody I know, you might not be, but you might want to look in the mirror and see if you're actually establishing rapport with people, giving them a chance to ask you that unasked question, and then actually engaging them in a conversation rather than just pitching them. Pain, if they are actually in pain, or if they do have the feeling that they have a want or a need for what you've got, if they're not willing to provide you with that information, my hunch is you did not establish rapport with them. They don't trust you enough to open up to you. And that is something that salespeople usually skip or just don't do well. People will open up to you when they trust you. So that's what I would encourage you to do. Tony Volpe says, oh, thank you very much, Tony. I appreciate that. Great content. That was me, Jeff. Bruce Caseman. Okay, Bruce. How do you address a client who gives a verbal agreement to do business with me and then doesn't respond to calls and emails? Oh, that's a great question. So what I do then is I send them 10 pizzas. I call Domino's and have pizzas delivered. No, I'm just kidding. I don't do that. I would never do that to anybody anymore. That's actually a topic for another day because we're almost out of time, but I'm going to give you a quick answer here. And it looks like that was me, Bruce, again. Hey, Bruce. So when somebody agrees to do business with you, and I'm guessing you just need to fill out the paperwork or something like that, or maybe deliver the proposal and then get a contract signed. What happened here is you did not do the most important thing, which I think you can do when you're selling, and that's get a next step, get a best next action step. I call it the BNAS. And that means you should never leave a meeting or a phone call without getting a commitment to the next meeting or phone call. So if you have somebody who's given you a verbal agreement to do business with you, that means you must be speaking with them. And if somebody says, okay, we're going to do business, my question is, great. When would you like to get together to go over the paperwork and take care of everything, tie up all the knots and move this thing forward? How's next Tuesday at 3? Well, when somebody agrees to meet with you next Tuesday at 3, you don't have to be following up with phone calls and emails because they've already agreed to meet with you. If they won't agree to meet with you, because for whatever reason, yeah, just give me a call or call me next month, call me next quarter, call me when hell freezes over, you don't really have a prospect. They were telling you they're giving you a verbal agreement to do business with you because they know it's the easiest way to get rid of you, and they're never going to pick up the phone again or answer your emails. So always get a best next action step. We are exactly at 11 o'clock, actually 11:01 on one clock and 11 o'clock on the other. So I'm going to let you guys go. I hope this was of value to you. Like all these, this is recorded and will be in the Sales Pro Network as well as on our YouTube channel, the Sales Pro Network. And please remember this as I end every week, sales is a game of making things happen. I hope this helps you to do that. Get out there and make sales happen. Thank you very much for listening, everybody. Have a great weekend. Speak to you soon.